You're listening to Being Autistic. I'm your host, Shelly, and I am a 50-year-old woman sharing my experiences about what it's like to grow up knowing I was different but not knowing why, how I learned I was on the autism spectrum, and what it's like to be autistic. Hello, everyone. In this episode, we're going to talk about special interests. This is one of my favorite parts about autism. So, autism's not all bad. There's some really good traits that come along with it, and one of those is having special interests. So I'm going to talk about what's the difference between a special interest and just a regular interest. Like, why is it called a special interest? There's a couple of differences. So, I honestly think that even neurotypical people can have special interests. However, I think there might be some extra depth to that autistic people have. But let's dive into it. As I talk, I'll probably think of the things that I wanted to say. So basically, a special interest is an interest that, what I like to say is, it kind of takes over your life. It kind of becomes an obsession. And there's so many different things that make it different than just a regular interest. So I'm going to talk about something that's just a regular interest and then compare the two. So in my life, I'll use me as an example. I have an interest in cooking. I love to eat healthy and I love to cook. And so that's an interest of mine. So I cook my own meals. I have had a couple of jobs where I've cooked food, and honestly, I'll try new recipes, I'll create my own recipes, and that's kind of where it stops. That's a good example of a typical interest. It's a healthy amount of time that you spend on it, like maybe a couple minutes a day, a couple hours a week, but it's not anything that anybody else is going to notice. That's a key. Everybody has interests, but everybody, especially neurotypical people, they know how much time they spend on their interest. And so they can see when other people are interested in things equally. And that's that. Then when it comes to a special interest, it's going to take on a whole new level. So I'm not going to use the cooking example for that one because that's not a special interest. It's just a regular interest. So now I'm going to talk about something that is a special interest so I can give you all of the examples of how this is different. My number one biggest special interest in my life is music. And I did an episode on this where I talked about how I am with music, and I'm going to repeat a little bit of that in this, but that episode was more about how music is good for autistic people. So for me, this is how my special interest of music has played out. It started at an early age, of course. I was probably 3 or 4. I listened to music with my mom's radio or stereo record player, and that was literally all that I did when I couldn't go outside. So I would just sit with my headphones, well, they were her headphones, and just for hours listen to music. And then I'd start getting my own records, my own record collection. I had my own little toy, not really toy, it worked, a record player. And when I got old enough to, well, I should say when they invented the Walkman with cassettes, this was in the 80s, I got one of those. And then I could bring my music, listen to the radio, my tapes, anywhere. I didn't have to stay indoors. So I would spend hours, and I mean hours, sitting on the swing set, just listening to music. I would sit out there after school, and many, many, many nights I would be out there after dark. And in the summer, it doesn't get dark until after 9. So that was, I would sometimes ride my bike around too. And, I also had the music on when I did that. So, and then I also had a boombox, a radio that played cassettes, and I would listen to that in bed. And it was almost like a companion for me. It was like another entity. It was always with me. And here's where it gets a little more deep. I became so into the musicians that I liked that I would want to see the videos, and this was back in the MTV days when they actually played videos, and it was kind of like I was obsessed. I was literally obsessed so much with the music that I loved that I had to have the videos, and by having them I would record them from the TV onto a VHS. And the thing was, my family never had cable TV. We only had the 4 basic channels. So what I would do is I would take my VHS cassette with me every single time we went to a relative's house. All my aunts and uncles that had cable, whenever we went there, I'd bring my cassette and I'd say, "Can I record videos?" So like they'd be in a different room and I'd be in the living room with the TV and watching the videos, and I would just sit there and pray that they would play the videos that I wanted. And of course, I also had magazines, so I got all the magazines with the bands in them that I liked, and that's where I began to memorize. Not trying to, but I just knew all of the band members' names. I knew where they came from. I knew their birthdays. I knew every detail about the bands. And this is every band, like hundreds of them that I was obsessed with. And of course, being a teenager, I had posters on my walls of these bands. So I became basically like a walking encyclopedia of all of the bands that I loved. I could tell you everything about them. And so that became also, when it comes to I was a teenager, of course, so I was starting to feel attracted to the opposite sex, and I was so awkward with real people that I didn't even date. I instead created in my mind stories of me with these musicians because I was attracted to them. And that's where my love for men with long hair happened, because in the 80s all the musicians had long hair and they look like women, and that's kind of another thing too, is I've always been attracted to feminine men, like men that had pretty faces and long hair, and that's what the bands that I liked, the 80s hair bands is what they were called. And so that's what I grew up on, and that became my way of exploring sexuality, I guess you could say, because I would insert myself into these fantasies with these rock stars, and that was where I acted out things instead of doing it in real life. And so it started with the music. It ended up being, learning about the music, having to have the music. I had to have all the cassettes, all the videos, all the magazines, and then they also became my romantic interest, imaginary, because I wasn't doing that in real life. So that's kind of like the base, the foundation of my obsession with music and how it took over my life. I also, so that continued into, for my whole life. Music's always been my number one. And then I started going to concerts, and I've been to probably a couple hundred concerts, single concerts. But now I pretty much, now that I'm middle-aged, I don't go to them anymore as much, unless it's like a favorite band. But mostly I go to music festivals now, so it's like I'm seeing maybe 30 bands in one weekend. So it's still a regular thing for me to see live music. And I still remember all the details of all of the musicians, like from the 80s. Like, and this is something with autistic people have a really good long-term memory of all the facts and information that they're obsessed with. Like, whatever your special interest is, you're probably going to memorize all of the information about it. And that's how I am with all of these bands that I've loved. And it was strongest most when I was a teenager, because that was literally all I paid attention to. As I grew older, though, I became interested in other things too, but music was still always my number one. So Yeah, I could probably tell you the drummer's name from some random one-hit wonder from the 90s, and that's where autism is kind of, I don't want to say to blame, but it's because of autism that I even picked up that information in the first place, because most people, most neurotypical people with a regular interest, they're not going to seek out information. They're going to maybe learn the basics, what they have to learn, but they're going to be like, yeah, I love this band, but I don't know the name of the song, and I don't know what album it came from, and I can't tell you the band members' names, And I'm like, oh, I can tell you all their names. I can tell you what state they came from. I can tell you what album it was. I can tell you what in what order the albums came out. And so that's the difference. It's a difference of the information that you hold in your memory. And that's all. And another thing is that other people will notice when you have a special interest. So like I said earlier, when it comes to regular interests and neurotypical people, it's going to be an even level, and they might not even know that person has an interest. You might have to ask them, what are your interests? Oh, once a week I do this. Oh, cool, But with a autistic person and a special interest, you're probably going to know within minutes of meeting them. They're probably going to be displaying some sort of outward clue, like maybe something that they're wearing is gonna, like maybe they're wearing a band shirt, or they might have a purse or a bag that has a picture of whatever their interest is. And chances are, your first conversation with an autistic person, you will probably find out what their special interest is. And this is another difference between autistic people and neurotypical people, is we feel compelled, absolutely compelled, just like we have to talk about this special interest. It's not even negotiable. It's like, because our special interest is probably 90% of what we even want to talk about in the world. Like, if you meet an autistic person and you have a couple different conversations with them, most of the time the conversation is going to flow a lot better if you are talking about their special interest. And, there's this narrow focus where the special interest is the majority of what they want to talk about, and they don't really want to talk about much else unless they have a lot of special interests. I myself have, I have so many interests, but I think only maybe 2 of them might be considered special interest. The music, of course, and then my other special interest is paper products, which would be things like notebooks and binders and clipboards and just loose leaf paper. I'm obsessed with, journals and planners and all of those paper products. Like that, that's so much of an obsession for me that I've actually started making them myself, designing them myself, using them, and then I sell them in my Etsy shop. And so I made a business, and that's my biggest source of income right now, is my Etsy shop, where I sell, printable stationery things like planners, journals, and things like that, because I am obsessed with them. And I would not be able to do that if that wasn't a special interest. So, see, you're going to find these things that they just kind of cross the threshold into a whole different level. And that's how you can know the difference. And so when you're talking to someone about it, it becomes it's like info dumping. This is another thing that autistic people do, is info dump, which is where, the floodgates are open and they're going to just say everything that they know about that subject, and they're going to but it's not in a bragging way. Like, I'm not trying to prove how much I know about music. I'm just obsessed with music. So I love to talk about music. And if I meet someone else that's just as obsessed with music, or even one of the same bands that we would share in common, oh my God, that's literally the main way that I make friends, is through my special interests. And that's another thing I wanted to talk about, because autistic people struggle with making friends, and I did an episode on that as well, all of my struggles with friendships, if you want to listen to that one. Autistic people want to make friends with people who also share their interests, and if it's a special interest, even better, because that way both of you will recognize the passion, and nobody's going to say, you talk about that too much, let's talk about something else. No, none of that. It's going to be for 5 hours straight we're going to talk about this band and then maybe the next 5 hours after that we can talk about the album that came after the first album. You know, that's how long we can talk about the things that we're obsessed with. And I don't think people that are neurotypical could ever talk about any one subject for that long, unless it's, you know, I don't know. I'm sure there's exceptions. There's probably exceptions to everything that I'm saying, but this is a general commonality. And I think I've even heard of autistic people not having a special interest. Although I think it would be kind of rare, not as common. So yeah, when it comes to making friends, autistic people, especially, you know, the people that have a special interest, they're going to just be attracted to anybody that's into the same things, because we don't mess around with all this small talk crap. We don't want to be friends with someone just because we work with them or just because they live next door. We want to be friends with someone on a deep level because we share the same interest. And that can also, you know, be because it's somebody to do things with, you know, like for me, my friends are all into music. So we go to shows together. We go to festivals together. I spend a lot of time, I'd say 90% of the time that I'm on the internet, I'm talking to other people that are also obsessed with the bands that I love. And so here's another thing I wanted to mention about special interests is they don't have to specifically last a long time. And before I learned that I was autistic, I knew about this concept called multipotentiality, or it's also called being a scanner. It's also called a Renaissance person. Basically somebody that has a lot of really intense interests, but they don't last a long time. Because the person wants to dive deep and really go head first into this subject, learn everything they can about it, and they almost like kind of burn themselves out on it then, and then they move on to the next one, and then they get equally as strong into that thing. So those are other terms that I always identified with, because yeah, you know, the Renaissance person thing, back in the Renaissance, people just explored their interests, and they, you know, like somebody was a writer, and after they wrote a book, then they wanted to learn about like herbalism, so they learned all the herbs, and then after they became an expert in that, then they, you know, another thing. It's always another thing, but it's always an equally passionate, intensity. And so then when I learned I was autistic, I thought a special interest is basically the same thing as those, because you can rotate through them. It's not like you're never going to be interested in those things again. It's just that, you know, you kind of burn yourself out on it, or you just get, you know, okay, I learned everything I wanted to learn, and now this other thing is calling my attention. And that might have something to do with it as well, because autistic people tend to have ADHD, where we get really distracted by something else just the same. So this happens to me with a lot of things, and even happens to me with music. I will be so obsessed with a band for a long length of time. Like, I've been obsessed with bands for as long as a year or two, where I will only want to just listen to that band for all of that time. And then I'm like, I might hear another band, and then I'm like, whoa, I really like this. And then something in me is just going to pull me. It really feels like a pull. It feels like I'm being mentally pulled. Like I'm obsessed. I'm compelled to learn more about this thing, and then it's a rabbit hole, and then I'm deep in it. And one of the things that I do when I first discover another special interest is I get on the internet, and it's the mother of all rabbit holes. You just research, and Google, and you want to get everything. You want to find videos about this thing, you want to read blog posts about this thing, and then you want to buy things about that thing. Like all the bands that I get obsessed with, I need to watch all their videos, I need to find all the websites that are about them, I need to buy a shirt or maybe other things, and then of course I gotta see them live. And of course then also I have to find other people that are into this band, because I don't have people in real life that I can just find. It's not like you can just walk outside and know where the people are that love the same things you do. And in most people's lives, they're not going to have it that easy. So we have to seek out these people, and the internet is made for that. So autistic people love the internet for this reason. Most of us just, that's where we turn to indulge our special interest, whether it's buying the thing we're looking for information about the thing, buying books about that interest. Here's an example of that. My latest obsession is a specific band, and I bought a shirt, and then I found out that there's a couple books about this band, so I bought both of the books, and I know everything. I think I know more about this band than most of their fans that are not autistic, because they're probably just a casual listener. They know that some of the songs that they like, they've seen them live, they know some of the names of the albums, and that might be where it stops. They might not even know the drummer's name, they might not know what area of the world they come from, they might not know how they got their start. I know all of it, and I've only been obsessed with this band for like 2 or 3 months right now, as it stands now. I mean, it's going to keep continuing, because I'm actually seeing them live in a month and a half from now, or maybe it's 2 months. In case you're curious, it's Muse. I'm so obsessed with Muse. They're my new favorite obsession. I right now, I currently actually believe that they are the best band in the planet. They're my favorite band that I've ever been obsessed with. And that's saying a lot, because I have had so many favorite bands. I've probably had, at any point in my life, I would have probably said I've had 100 favorite bands. But now, this special interest obsession is so strong that I honestly do feel like they are my favorite band of my entire life. And so, yeah, I'm going to be seeing them live in February, and I'm really excited about that. So, I did lose my train of thought there, because that's another example of how the autistic brain works. I follow the tangent, and then it's like being in a maze. And I went down one maze, and now I'm like, okay, I completely forgot what I was just saying. Now I got to back up. So yeah, I think what I was talking about was trying to find other people who are also interested in your special interests, so that you can go to events based on your special interest. And yeah, so that's where the internet's good. And so this is how I have made almost all of my friends, and that is through the internet when it comes to music. So, Facebook groups, Reddit. I'm on Reddit now for all of my favorite bands and all of my subjects that I love. Because it's almost torture for an autistic person to have a special interest and not have someone to talk to about it. That, to me, would almost feel as bad as, struggling through something emotionally and not having anybody to vent to. That's kind of like very similar. So, as you can see by the way that I have described my special interest, there's no way that you're going to meet me and not find out what my special interest is. So that's the difference between a special interest and just a casual interest to a neurotypical person. And here's some more things I want to say about special interest. Like I said, you can bounce around from one to another. It doesn't have to be the same one for your whole life. Like for me, the example is music, but within that, there are lots of different sub interests. So music will always be my number one, but I'm going to be interested in different bands at different times. Like I said, I've probably had a couple hundred favorites, but right now I have the one, and that's literally all I want to listen to. You know, like I'm in a friend's car and they're like, "Hey, anybody got any requests?" I'm like, "I know you don't own a single album of my favorite band right now, so I'm just not going to say anything because that's all I want to hear anyway." You know, it becomes quite obvious, and it also becomes quite eccentric. I don't know if eccentric is the correct word, but people will notice. It becomes obvious. Yeah, it's just something that you can't hide. It just becomes a compulsion to talk about it, to talk to others about it. So if you are autistic and you have special interests and you are struggling to find people to talk to about it, get on Reddit or Facebook groups. Most likely there is a group for that person or for that special interest to find other people. And you know, it's been like this my whole life. Well, I can't even say that because the internet wasn't even invented until I was like in my late 20s, early 30s. So back then I just enjoyed my interests by myself. Or you know, I guess, you know, music is a pretty common one, so I did have friends that were interested in music that I could find easily. In fact, my best friend that I've known for like 30 years, we have gone to a lot of concerts together and share a lot of the same favorite bands, so that was nice. But I've noticed that with a lot of my special interests, like with the stationery and the planners and stuff, that's a hard one. You know, this is kind of interesting because literally just before I started recording this episode, I was listening to a YouTube video about autism. And the guy was explaining some traits of autism, and he said that one of them was when kids become interested in paper and spiral-bound notebooks and, you know, filing products. And I'm like, what? That's me. That's so me. Like, I've always been interested in those things, and just to hear somebody else say it was like, that must be a thing. That must be something that autistic people love. So if you are autistic and you are listening to this going, wow, I do like those things. I thought I liked them because they're useful or they're helpful, which they are, but, you know, and here's an example of how you can tell. Somebody might have a notebook that they write in. They might have a planner that they write in every day, and that's a typical interest. But if this is your special interest, you will have 100 of them instead of one. I can't tell you how many I have because they're piled up in different locations in my house. I'm looking right now at probably 15 of them within eye shot. You know, notebooks, planners, folders, binders for different purposes, and you know, I collect them so I collect them so that I have them for when I need them. And then I've got, when I'm looking over here, I'm seeing one more, and then I'm looking around and I'm looking over there and I see, I mean, they're covered by a tapestry to make it so that, you know, not everybody in the world comes over and sees my thousands of paper products. But I've got stacks of papers just waiting to be used, you know, loose leaf paper. I mean, I'll go to a thrift store and I'll see that they have loose leaf paper, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm buying all of them, you know, and people are probably looking at me like, why does she need that many pieces of loose leaf paper? Because I need to collect it. And this is an autistic thing. I just need to have these things. So your special interest is going to be apparent. Just look around your house. What do you own 1,000 of? You know, and then I've got a spare room with, oh my God, there's even more in there. I've got an entire, I don't know what they're called. It's like a container, like shelf, but it's on wheels, and it's got drawers and handles and containers in there. And that thing is full of accessories for paper, you know, like pens and scissors and craft products, all sorts of craft paper. I went through a phase where I wanted to get into scrapbooking because, you know, that's an extension of the paper thing. Just buying different colored paper, different styles of paper, designs of paper. Notebooks. So many spiral bound notebooks. And they're my favorite because you can use them for anything. You can start a journal. You can make it into a planner. You can use it to take notes. You can use it as a to-do list. You can write a book. You can, oh my God, there's so many ways you can use them. And the thing with, having a special interest is you know that you're going to use these things because you have multiple uses for them that you've already done. So you'll go to a store and you're like, wow, here's the stationery section, and here's the section where they have planners and journals and binders and notebooks, and I literally can't control myself. Like, I'll see the prettiest ones. I go by pretty. I mean, I'm just drawn to the prettiness. So I see a pretty colored spiral bound notebook. I have to buy it, not because I need it, but because I know that will have it for someday in the future when my other ones get filled up. And so I have stacks of them. I fill them up, and here's the thing, I fill them up and I don't throw them away. I just keep them because it's useful information that I put in there. I can get some benefit out of looking at the thing again. And that's another sign of a special interest when you buy things, you collect, they become collections. And I know there's probably a lot of neurotypical people that have collections. I mean, it's probably common. Almost everybody collects a certain thing. Like, it actually is a question that people might ask. Like, what are some collections that you have in your house? And some people might say, I collect china or silverware or thimbles or buttons or spoons or, things like that they look at. They don't really use them. They just collect them and look at them, which is another sign that you have autism. If you just like to collect things to line them up and look at them and not necessarily use them. I mean, I love to use my notebooks, of course, but I get just as much enjoyment out of looking at them on my shelf. Like, when I buy them, I get so excited to be like, oh, I can't wait to use this. I'm going to put it on my shelf right here next to all my other ones that I haven't used yet. And I'm just going to look at them and be like, look at all my beautiful notebooks that I have that I'm not using. And then, that's a sign. So, yeah, that's my other special interest. So you're probably starting to now, if you're not already, be aware of the things that kind of cross that threshold for you. They're not just a typical passing casual interest. It's like an all-consuming thing. You can't really control yourself when it comes to buying things about your special interest, and you just want to talk about it forever, which is why I'm just rambling about my special interests, because that's what I want to do. And so, yeah, I think at this point I've said everything I wanted to say, and if I keep talking, it's just going to be about how much I love my notebooks and my music bands. So I hope you got some benefit out of this episode, and be sure to look for people out there that are interested in your special interest, because it'll feed it. You're going to feed the fire. Just you find somebody that's just as obsessed with that thing as you, and then you'll become unstoppable. You're going to form a bond with that person, and it's going to be great, and you're going to feel so fulfilled. Typical conversations don't fulfill us. We don't like small talk. We want to talk about our special interests and things that light us up. So enjoy that. It's one of the best things about having autism. So thank you so much for listening to this episode, and I will see you in next week's episode.